So, Sajid Javid urging the NHS to protect single-sex hospital wards after new guidance said transgender women could legally be excluded from women-only spaces. It throws up a question which we'll come to in a second. The Health Secretary has said the NHS must take full account of that ruling from the Equalities Watchdog, which I think I'm right in saying has no absolute legal standing, which said single-sex spaces did not always have to include transgender people. The NHS was already reviewing whether trans women should be treated on female-only wards. Of course, this comes amidst a never-ending discussion on single-sex toilets, gender-neutral changing rooms, all manner of other questions around gender and sexuality. For many people, it's a simple no-brainer. There are men and there are women. I'll go one further and say there are men, there are women, there are trans men and there are trans women. And this is where the problem starts. We keep hearing this question, what is a woman? Define a woman. Every journalist you can think of keeps asking every politician you can think of the same question. Can you define a woman, etc.? It should be non-controversial. On Monday this week, we were discussing another issue related to this. We took a call from Jo in Cornwall, who put the question the other way around. Here's what she said.
It's not so much what defines a woman or what defines a man. Really, the only question for me is what defines a transgender person? That's what we need to be talking about. That's the question.
And, I think she's absolutely spot on. I think that is the way we put this discussion, this debate. It shouldn't be a debate. These are people's lives, but we put this issue to rest. Surely, at this point, if you could define that point, for the first time, a bit more clarity, if you like, in the argument, because this is central to the whole thing. I've said a gazillion times before, there's never been anything particularly controversial or arguable about trans people. I've never lived in a world where there aren't trans people. I've met many trans people over the years, but up until about half an hour ago, it seems, never had the need to carry out a debate about someone's trans disposition. In fact, now I think about it, I'm not even sure in 20 years that up until this last year, I've ever done a debate about trans issues because they didn't really exist. Today, it's a different story. And here's why. We're not just talking about trans women and trans men. We're talking about bigender, gender void, agender, two-spirited, gender queen, cisgender, polygender, omnigender, gender binary, non-binary, gender neutral. The list goes on. There's another 150 where that came from. And that, everybody, is central to this discussion. I think that fuels the question that Jo in Cornwall asked, what is a trans woman? Because it's that confusion, the hysteria, if you like, of the gender industry, let's call it what it is, that is causing this problem. I don't think anybody's got an issue with transgender women or transgender men. Not really. There's going to be a few voices at the back who can't get their head around it, and that's fine too. If it's something you don't understand, so what? You don't understand, you don't follow it. But it's all the other stuff that's messed this up. Would I be right on that? 0344 499 1000. What defines somebody who is transgender? It's a very simple question. If you can get to that point, then we can say, right, everybody else who's somehow trying to clutch at a title, it could even be one you've invented yourself, and many workplaces will require and compel everybody else to conform to your requirements of your new gender identity. How the hell did we get there? I don't know many trans people. And when I've interviewed trans women, like India Willoughby, I always mention India. Sadly, she won't come on the programme, but I reference her. I think she slightly changed her stance on some of this, but she certainly shared that sentiment, that all of these other areas were incredibly distracting, destructive, and nonsensical in this wider debate. When we first started interviewing her, we weren't interviewing her as a trans woman. We were interviewing her as a journalist, as a commentator who would come on and talk about what was in the news. And now it's very much defined everything. But I think the whole thing has been messed up. And this term, by the way, that's been wheeled out, have you seen gender critical? Are they GC? I keep seeing this. Yeah, another GC. Like it's some kind of terminology for a hate-fueled figure that's out there. Another one of the GC brigade. It's up there with, racist, homophobe, GC critical, gender critical. That's the word. Gender critical. Well, yeah. I mean, is it critical? Is it questioning to wonder about 100 genders? And I think that's the point, isn't it? If somebody is transgender and they live as a woman and they are physically, have gone through every process that is needed to anatomically represent that, what was always known in their mind, and have done for years, does anybody think that person should be peeing in the gents? Really? Should that person be on a male ward in a hospital, having lived for 30 years as a woman? Passport says female. Birth certificate now says female. So my own thought on this is I don't think that's the group that people have an issue with. I think it's all the other issues that are surrounding this spectrum, the identity politics that lurks behind this debate. That, for me, defines the problem. And I keep using this phrase. I don't think anybody nobody should want to be horrible to anyone else. Why would you not want to be kind to somebody? If somebody says, I want to live as a woman, I want to live as a man, whatever. I mean, frankly, have you not got enough going on in your own life to actually give a toss about what somebody else wants to do with their existence, how they live, whether they put a dress on, a pair of dungarees, a pair of jeans? Does it matter to you in any respect? But where it does cause a confusion, you obviously have changing rooms, you have women's refuge centres, you have toilets, and they seem to be the areas. Now, if you could define then who is transgender, I think you'd be able to probably agree with me and say, look, it would be extraordinary if a transgender woman was using the male loos. That would be just weird. I mean, you couldn't use the urinals anyway because you'd have, frankly, nothing to pee with in that respect. So that wouldn't work. It would just be weird. Well, does anybody think that? Maybe some people do. This is the point of this discussion. Maybe in some people's world, it doesn't matter whether you're 30, 40 years living, full surgery, everything, transitioning from male to female. It makes no odds at all. You still should be using the loo that represents your gender at birth. I just think that would be weird. But everybody else in the equation, is that not where the discussion kind of fires up? The gazillion other genders. And again, I genuinely don't care. But I would care a little bit if, I mentioned the women's refuge centres where women are able to go or recommended to go if there's been a story of domestic violence or some other traumatic reason why you might want to be away from the perpetrator of your crime. Would you want to be sitting in there and a bloke turns up who just declares himself a woman? Now, I would guess that situation has probably never arisen. But that's the example that's always given, that female-only places. Because no matter how trans you might be and how long you have been transition in, you're never going to be... It's where I understand the J.K. Rowling point, right? I know there seems to be an age divide on this, that if you're sort of, 20 up, between 20 and 30, then you don't understand J.K. Rowling. She's person non grata. But what she's arguing for is for the rights of women, and women's backstory and women's history and women's disposition and all that goes with that. When somebody has a baby, a woman is having a baby, not people having babies, not people having periods. Women, okay? There's a woman's story. There's a man's story out there as well. And that doesn't mean at any level you would preclude or want to be nasty to a trans person. But you would have to surely acknowledge that in the spectrum... we are literally reinventing the human journey here. We're rewriting the story by glibly just coming out with the amount of phrases I just listed and more. So let's nail it. Let's knuckle this down. What defines somebody who is transgender? If you just call yourself a woman, would any person in that situation seriously expect to walk into a gynecological unit and be admitted? Well, for obvious reasons, you wouldn't be there, but you take the point. In a female-only ward, a bloke sitting there, with a big bushy beard, saying, actually, I identify as a woman. Would it not be reasonable that you might say, look, this is probably not the best place for you to be? Is that the issue, that we have failed to fully define who or what is transgender? 0344 499 1000. And when it comes to using the toilets, the analogy or the example I gave, are you seriously saying that anyone, regardless of how long and what they've gone through to transition from male to female, should still use the loo that represents the gender they had at birth? Comments coming from you on this. Kevin says, as you say, nobody wants to be unkind. This is about common sense and logic. It would be ludicrous for a fully transitioned woman to use the men's loos, but simultaneously absolutely bonkers to allow somebody who simply decided to call themselves a woman to use the ladies. I think we'd probably all concur with that. Sajid Javid, the reason the catalyst, if you like, for this particular element of the discussion is this. Sajid Javid urging the NHS to protect single-sex wards. This comes after new guidance states transgender women could legally be excluded from those women-only spaces. The Health Secretary told the NHS to take full account of a ruling from the Equalities Watchdog, which said single-sex spaces did not always have to include transgender people. I think I'm right in saying, by the way, that the Equalities Watchdog doesn't have any legal teeth, more of a recommendation. Who will this apply to? And I mentioned one of our callers, Joe in Cornwall, who put it kind of the other way. You know, what is the definition of somebody who is transgender? And I thought that was a completely reasonable question. And if we can, if that question takes us to a much more understandable answer, then that's got to be a good thing, right? Miranda Yardley is a human rights activist who herself is trans. Miranda, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. What about you?
I'm good, thanks. I mean, is the question reasonable? What defines a transgender person?
I think all questions are reasonable, and I think it is perfectly fair and reasonable to challenge anything that anybody claims, especially when their claim is at odds with what you see with your own eyes. And
in terms of, I mean, we can talk about single-sex wards, but I guess the big one seems to be the toilets, doesn't it? It always comes back to the lavatories on this one. In terms of who is allowed to use them, is this a penis issue, to put it bluntly? Is that when people say, well, I don't mind somebody who's fully transitioned because they are therefore a woman, and I can understand that. They might, we argue about the biological elements of this, but I'll accept that somebody who's transitioned, that works for me, so that's fine, but anyone else not fine. Is that how you're seeing this debate unravel?
Well, first of all, it's not your toilets that are being claimed, not your toilets and changing rooms that are being claimed by men who are calling themselves women, who are deciding that they are embracing this idea that their own identity as a woman supersedes the fact that they that they are male, that they have a male body. I think that one of the issues here is that things have gone quite a long way down a very dark and very scary rabbit hole, in that we've reached a position whereby there were people who, there were men like me who claimed to be transsexual, who we were very, very small in number. And there was a process that we went through. We went through a process of counselling, of therapy, and this idea that we would come to understand ourselves more, make that decision, and go through a particular process. And being transsexual was essentially having gone through a process that involved surgery and hormones. Yeah, and we can talk another time as to the ethics behind that. We have, however, since around 2004, when Stonewall ran out of money-making ideas and jumped on the bandwagon of trans, we've had through institutions been told, and institutions have been made to implement frameworks that are supposed to be to do with equality and diversity, which make any man who decides that he's a woman fungible with women, i.e., a man who suddenly decides he is a woman has this gender identity that he can claim, and this gender identity,
which is as valid as yours, which is ridiculous, right?
Well, personally, I don't believe in gender identity. I think the whole idea is based upon stereotypes and magical thinking. I don't think that we can be born with an idea of being male or female. And again, you said about questioning things. I think we should all question about what it actually means to be a man or to be a woman.
Yeah, and I think with this, I was just reminded of the one of many which you'll be familiar with, the Disney story. We're doing away with the terms ladies and gentlemen. Now, what I find peculiar about that is that doesn't equate to being kind to trans people, because trans people would be a lady or a gentleman. So it's obviously aimed at a completely different group altogether, which I assume are people who are gender neutral. And I can't help but think that number would be so tiny, Miranda, that it would seem extraordinary that we would eradicate the English language and spend multi-millions of pounds around the world altering signage all over the place to appease this one group that, well, frankly, there's huge question marks over what that even means. But surely that's the only group those decisions could be aimed at. Because it's not aimed at you, it's not aimed at me.
There's a whole other can of worms there. Even what does trans mean? A question that I used to enjoy asking on Twitter was, what is the difference between a trans woman who doesn't have surgery and doesn't take hormones and a man? What is that material, measurable difference between a man who claims to be a woman and does not go through any form of trans process?
Yeah.
What is the difference between that man and or between that trans person who claims to be trans and a man? And there is no difference. And the measurable material differences that we can measure between men who claim to be transgender and other men are often insignificant, and this is creating a huge problem.
This is it, isn't it? I mean, I think you've just identified precisely what the question when Joe, the caller, rang in. It's exactly this, isn't it? It's not about you or a trans man or any other trans woman. It's about this other area, this sort of bit in the middle, no pun intended, where there seems to be an identity war going on.
Yeah, and to some degree, this whole identity war thing, this whole idea of the non-binary and the 96 genders, I mean, there are a bunch of issues around that. First of all, it kind of distracts from dealing with there is an issue whether a transitioned trans woman should be using female spaces. Personally, I think that we should not. I think that if we are going to identify ourselves as or we are going to identify with women, I think that we owe them the decency to give them the courtesy of allowing them their own spaces and their own privacy away from males. The way that men are, we could admit that not all men are brought up in the same environment and not socialized the same. But what we can say is that the way that men are socialized and the way that women are socialized are very different.
Yeah.
And that there are significant differences with the physicality and physiology with men that make them a risk to women. And I'm not saying that all trans women are a risk to women. I'm certainly not saying that all men are a risk to women. But when we're talking about sex-based violence, it's about men on women. The vast number of incidences of domestic violence and of sexual and other physical crime involve men as the perpetrator, and that their victims are often women. And I'm not denying that there is no such thing as men on men crime, but the impact of women on man crime is far less.
Yeah. In terms of, so you would use a male loo, would you?
I would use a male loo, or I would use a single occupancy room.
And if you went into a gym changing room, would people not, I mean, you are, dressed as a woman, would males in a gym changing room not think, why is she in here?
Do you think I'm dressed as a woman? I mean, I'm just dressed as...
You might. I'm assuming as a trans woman, you do dress as a woman.
I'm a child of the 80s. What does it mean to dress as a woman?
It's a fair point. It's a fair point.
It's like
big black baggy jumpers crosses all boundaries, doesn't it? Yeah. But you take my point. But that you would have people that might go, well, hang on, there's a woman in the changing room.
Well,
if you walked in a dress, to put it obviously.
Most of us can tell whether someone is a man or a woman without actually, just by looking at them. We are, as human beings, we are animals, and as males and as females, we are programmed to recognise a member of the opposite sex and of the same sex. We can do that. We can do that just by looking at people and not being funny. I'm fully aware that there are trans people out there who've been through a vast number of surgeries and, given a photograph, will look indistinguishable from women. But to be honest, so many trans people like that, so many trans women like that, you put them in a room and you can tell them by the way that they hold themselves, the way that they behave, that they're male. And if I think that it's only fair and it's only right and it's only equitable to allow women their own spaces. And I think if trans women are going to claim to have any form of relatability to women, to claim to identify with women, I think it's only right that we should show them some empathy.
On paper, I understand that, but I would still come back, though, Miranda, to the example I gave, that if a trans woman who was, very convincingly female and was wearing a dress and had a nice figure and breasts and long, flowing brown hair, whatever, then that would look odd for that person to walk into a bloke's loo, wouldn't it?
I've been in plenty of blokes' loos where I've seen men come in drag. There's nothing unusual about that.
So that's not drag, is it? That's that's how somebody lives.
Well, as RuPaul once said, we're all born naked and everything is drag from there on.
That's a fair point. And on that point, listen, Miranda, thank you, Miranda Yardley, who is a human rights activist who is herself trans and doesn't think that trans women should be able to use the bathrooms or the changing rooms or the facilities of in this case, of men, of women. Responses to that, 0344 499 1000. I come back to the Disney example. It's the best current example we've got of this. The last time we had a really good example of this was the train company. Do you remember the train company did an announcement saying, "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen," and somebody complained. I think it was actually somebody who worked there, but they were not working at the time, and said, "Who are you addressing that to? I'm neither male nor female." And the train company put out the most sickening response to this, which was, "We are very sorry for using," I'm slightly paraphrasing here, "we're very sorry for using that kind of language." That kind of language. Ladies and gentlemen, we're sorry for using that kind of language. The person making the complaint was stirring it up, right? It was political. They were stirring it up, absolutely. Whipping up the frenzy. They didn't really care. So we're changing all of that to appease, a tiny group of people who claim to be gender neutral, non-binary, whichever terminology you want to use. I went through a load of them earlier. There's 96 genders out there. I don't know how or what language you would use to appease all of those people. So this one in from Ria, who says, Miranda is right. My total respect to Miranda. You are so there. However, you don't totally get it. I think referring to me on that. Well, I do get it. I absolutely get it. But I think there's not so much an elephant in the room, just a really obvious question. And that is the difference between, are we just talking about people who still have their male genitalia? Are they the ones that should be banned from male changing rooms and toilets, from female changing rooms and toilets? But if somebody has transitioned and gone through and I have to say, Miranda is a fairly lone voice in that world, Ria, from a trans perspective. a fairly lone voice, because I think most trans women who have transitioned and gone through the entire process, both the psychological stuff and the surgical stuff, will say, well, don't you think it's odd that I would be in a bloke's loo or a bloke's changing room? I have breasts. I have no penis. You would look at me, as Miranda said, you may in some cases be able to go, do you know what? I think that person might have used to be a bloke. You might make that conclusion. I don't think you'd always make that conclusion. There's plenty of trans people out there that probably would give lots of other women a run for their money in the ID department. But you take my point. Is that if we could establish what transgender is and all this other nonsense about the multiple genders, which I believe to be nonsense, to the point that the hysteria... I mean, who at Disney, an empire that was designed to appeal to boys and girls, who at Disney said, we need to change this? I'll get away from the ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls title and call them something else. To appease who? And as I said to Miranda and others, that doesn't even appease trans people. Because if you're a trans woman, you want to be known as a woman. You would be part of the ladies in the lady and gentleman thing. And if you're a trans man, the opposite to that. Really? They've literally eradicated the term ladies and gentlemen to appease what I assume are non-binary people, of whom there must be about 17 around the world. You take my point. 0344 499 1000. So are you, as a woman, comfortable or uncomfortable with any trans person using your facilities? Any trans person, even if they look like a woman, they've got female on their birth certificate, female on their passport, you wouldn't tell the difference if they walked into a room. Would you still maintain that person should use the men's loos? Because that's what it comes down to. Brian's in Sunderland. What are you thinking, Brian?
I just want to say, and I hope to God these people aren't getting these operations done on the NHS, because that's just a waste of resources and money. If they want to go and get this stuff done, then they should be done privately. That's my first point.
Okay.
And my second point is that trans women, well, not trans women, trans people, because they're not women in my eyes, so I call them trans people, should not be allowed to be in women's wards, should not be allowed to go in women's toilets, have to use disabled toilets like everybody else, or if they have to go to hospital, put them in single wards only. Yeah, if they don't want to be in the ward with a man, they have to go in a single ward. Because there's a lot of people out there who have got their tackles still pretending to be women, and we've heard horrible things in the papers and on the news media about people being attacked.
I mean, there's probably... I don't think there are many of those cases, but I do... what I do hear, Brian, is the wider point of what you're saying. But how would you apply that to a trans person who's lived as a woman for 30 years, looks like a woman, everything about them is a woman, other than the biology that they were born with? Now, you might say, well, that's quite a big other, but you take my point. They have breasts, they have no penis. They've existed in that body and in that world and lived their life without any harm or controversy for 30 years. You would say that person has to use the male loos?
Yeah, no, they could use a disabled toilet.
But they're not disabled, are they?
Well, no, but I mean, I've got mild epilepsy. I use a disabled toilet. But the thing is, to me, right, they are not women. If you're not born a woman, you're not a woman, full stop, right? They might look like a woman on top with a false,
You're not. But you're not a. Yeah, you're not a. You weren't born a woman, but you've become a woman.
It's not, in my eyes, it's physically not possible. And I mean, just going to get surgery doesn't make you a woman. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Yeah,
it doesn't. You're all. But how many boxes would you have to tick? So the biology, you can't. Your chromosomes, if you like. If you had a chromosome test, you'd be a bloke, and if you were a trans man, you'd be a woman. Okay, you can't change that. But if you've had all of the surgery required, and everything about you looks female, you live your life as a female, your passport, your birth certificate has been checked, everything about that, there's got to be a point when you'd say, well, that person is simultaneously, you might not acknowledge them as a woman, but you couldn't look at them and say they're a bloke either.
No, I would say they're transhuman. If that's the case, we'll call them transhuman instead. You know what I mean? Because that's what they are. But they're not, in my eyes, they can never be women.
What do you mean by transhuman? What does that mean?
Well, they're a human being who've changed over because of, they've gone through surgery, but doesn't still make them a woman in my eyes.
So you're saying the gender thing is immovable, so the term transgender isn't right?
Yeah. Sorry, trans people, I will never accept you. That's my view, and I'll always have my own view on it, and, I might have upset.
So, I mean, some people might listen to that and say, why would it bother you, Brian, when you say I will never accept you? I mean, that's quite a big statement, isn't it? Some might say that's not very nice.
I certainly wouldn't want to date one, for goodness sake. I mean, if
it's not compulsory. It's not compulsory to date a trans person.
Absolutely not. But I mean, I wouldn't like to go on a date, meet a woman, and find out it's not a woman. I'd be really shocked and like.
Yeah, and I think most trans people would probably fess up beforehand that was the case.
Yeah.
You'd like to think so. Listen, I hear
distinction as well. I mean, they don't have hips, so
look, I get it. Listen, thank you, Brian. The reason we wanted to have this discussion was for this very point, and it came up. Can we hear that caller again, Sam? This was from Monday. There seems to have been a story around this every day of the week so far, and they come up thick and fast at the moment. This was Joe in Cornwall.
It's not so much what defines a woman or what defines a man. Really, the only question for me is what defines a transgender person? That's what we need to be talking about. That's the question.
That is the question. What defines a transgender person? And I'm just wondering if you can get to that, bearing in mind how often everybody seems to be asked to define a woman at the moment. Well, let's throw it the other way around. Define a transgender woman, then we can all move on and stop spending time having to debate this endlessly. It's people like the train company and people like, I feel like cancelling my Disney Plus. I mean, I'm not normally in that department. There's a lot of good stuff on there, though, isn't there? A mate of mine didn't even know there was a National Geographic tab on there. Yeah, it's all there. It's not just superheroes and Star Wars and Dumbo and all the rest of it. But, when I consider the lunacy of a company eradicating ladies and gentlemen. So that is not a trend. What happens with that, people get mad. The train company apologising for using such terrible language as ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. They actually said sorry. That's not an apology to trans people because what they were apologising for doesn't affect trans people. What Disney are doing doesn't affect trans people. This is actually affecting people who call themselves gender neutral. And I don't know. That's yet to be established in the world of science or medicine, OK? It is a disposition some people claim, and it's fine. I have no issue with somebody saying I'm gender neutral. I don't feel like a bloke, and I also have no sense that I'm a woman either, so I'm gender neutral. Call yourself what you like. Who cares? But when the multi-billion-pound emporium that is Disney is altering its business model to placate that group, is that it? Is that what it is? Is it bigender, gender void, agender, omnigender, polygender, cisgender, genderqueer, gender binary, gender non-binary, gender neutral? I mean, the list really does go on. Apparently there's 96, but is that who it's aimed at? Is it all of those different genders? How comfortable are you in using the facilities? Because, by the way, the thing that he mentioned, the attacks in... I could make this up and have a far more raucous phone-in on it and pretend, women are getting attacked by perverts pretending they're women. I don't know how many times that has happened. I would imagine very few, and I would imagine that there's probably a big old list of straight men who's just walked into a ladies' toilet and carried out an attack as well. So I don't think it's that. That's become a kind of neat catch-all phrase to stop people thinking. There's a distinction to be made here. And what defines transgender is at the centre of all of that. 0344 499 1000. How comfortable are you in that situation? And by the way, somebody here made the point. Where is it? I'll find the text I got on this very issue, on the tweet I got, which I thought kind of neatly defines that particular area of how safe somebody is in a public loo because of this. This was the one from Nigel Hookwell who says, has anyone ever actually encountered the problem that we keep talking about? This was the tweet I was looking for. I've never been aware of sharing a changing room or a toilet with somebody of the opposite birth sex. I've never seen a row kick off, nor have I heard anybody else who's had this problem either. Why are we actually debating this point? Well, that is a fair point. I was talking to a mate of mine in the gym this morning I bumped into, and he said, what are you talking about today? I said, well, we're going to probably have a little look at this story. And he said, well, he said, I can't see where the problem would be. And that's from a bloke's perspective. If a man was in the changing room who was born a woman, and this is why we asked the question, so once and for all. This came in from Women Are Women, who said, absolutely love Miranda Yardley on Talk Radio. If Women's Hour on the BBC would have a trans woman on, why not Miranda? She made the ever excellent point that trans women should try identifying with women for a change. And Ian, a man cannot transition to a woman. No, you cannot biologically become a woman. But are we my question is only this, and by the way, this isn't a statement, it's kind of riddled with question. If you go through that whole process and live as a woman, and you have surgery to remove your genitalia, your testicles and your penis are removed, and you have surgery to give yourself breasts, sure, you're still not. The chromosome test will still say you're a male. But are you saying in the grandest, in the pie chart, if you like, that all of that counts for nothing? Because it'd be much easier for me to sit here and go, yeah, that's all nonsense. Nonsense. Bangs table, thumps chest. Nonsense. It's still a bloke. But if you've gone through it, surely you've ticked some boxes on the journey. You also won't be able to ever identify with the full woman experience. You won't know what childbirth is like. You won't know what periods are like. You won't know the backstory of being a woman. You won't be able to give birth, all of that. So in that respect, I agree with the text. Women are women. But are we seriously saying that all of that other stuff counts for nothing? That leaves you just as much a bloke as me. Because I don't think it does that either, does it? Nick's in London. What's happening here? Nick, hi.
Hello, Ian.
Hello.
I hope you're well.
I'm all right, yeah.
You started the hour with I'm confused. This is a confusing subject, and no, it's not to me. I think it's fairly straightforward. Trans people go through various stages, either engage with the full trans procedures, or part way through, or completely through.
Yeah.
And I think if you go through the process completely, so that your genitalia is changed, is altered, then I think it's quite straightforward as to which rooms and which spaces you've access to.
I would have thought so.
And I think it's especially important for ladies' toilets and safe spaces, showers, because there's something about the female reasoning, quite rightly and with a back history, that women like women-only safe spaces more than men like men-only safe spaces.
Yeah.
Historically, there's a good reason for that.
I get it. Yeah.
And so I don't think you can change that, compromise that at all. But having gone through the process of changing from a man to the woman with the surgery, genitalia removed and altered, and so on and so forth, I think it would be unfair.
Well, I mean, that's my point. That's got to use the phrase, it's got to count for something, right? I mean, it's never going to make you a biological female. I get that. But it's got surely, by any definition, that has to count for something. But if somebody, as I think Miranda was saying, Nick, if somebody just simply says, I'm a woman, and has gone through none of the process, none of the, the counselling and the psychology tests or whatever it is that the hoops, as I'm told, you have to jump through, and they've gone through surgery, then that's very different, right?
Agreed. I think someone who has not gone through any of that is in a different kettle of fish, because theoretically, if they also get full access to female-only spaces, you could have a man, physically a man, sharing the women's showers, which you wouldn't have thought any woman would really want that.
I don't. Yeah, I think you're.
Comfortable with
Yeah,
that.
I think you're spot on. Nick, great call. Thank you for that. And again, I throw this stuff out there not to disagree, because fundamentally the women are women tweet. I do get that, but I can't ignore what's in front of my own eyes. And if I can't look at trans women and say simultaneously they're the same as me, because they're not. Hence the trans bit. So I don't think trans women are saying they're biological women. They're saying they are trans women. So it's almost self-identified as being different in that respect. Gary's in Southampton. What are you making of this, Gary? Hi.
Oh, hi. Thanks for taking my call. Yeah, I kind of agree with the last guy. My thoughts are that if someone's gone to the trouble to be a trans woman and has had the full operations, as in, i.e. cutting the genitalia off down below, then I think that I agree that counts for something. But, for instance, the swimmer Leah Thomas, who's currently smashing all the women in abroad, yeah. I think it's Canada, she, okay, I'll try and be correct, has still got full genitalia down below as a man.
Yeah.
How can that be right? That is...
What is...
Like, I find that...
I know, I get it. But what do you do then with... Because I think I'm broadly in agreement with you, Gary, but what about the transition period? So you can't use the ladies, you can't use the ladies, you can't use the... Oh, Willie's gone, now you can use the ladies. Is that how it works?
Yeah, essentially, yeah. Until the old genitalia down below has disappeared. I mean, I was laughing because you were talking about women transitioning to a man being in the changing room. Men are men, and they'd probably find that more curious, right? But women want safe spaces, and to actually think that it's okay for a trans woman with male genitalia to be changing with women is appalling, and anyone who agrees with that is out of order.
So in the obvious situation, then, the obvious example, and by the way, Gary, I don't think these examples happen in real life very often. I think somebody who is transitioning probably stays away for this very reason. But if you have got breasts and you've got long, blonde hair and makeup and, you look very female, but you have yet to have your below surgery, then where does that person get changed?
Well, normally most locker rooms have a private area in the locker room.
But you'd have to walk in, wouldn't you? Like in my gym, you can go to a little cubicle, but you'd have to go through the room to get to the cubicle. So what you would essentially see is a woman walking into the men's.
Well, no, if they look like a woman, they could go in the woman's and maybe change in private in the private part.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, so I disagree. Like, I'm not being funny. I go to a gym and there's a trans woman with a beard, right?
Really?
Who changes, yes, in the female changing rooms. And I don't know if they've got full male genitalia because I've not been in there, but I'm assuming they have.
So this person this person wears women's clothes?
Yes, and a beard.
I mean, you'd have to assume that's somebody who's not serious about the transition, right? Which I think is the point you're broadly making.
I just think the whole conversation is becoming a bit of a joke to people.
Well, that's right, because in fact, the example you've just given about the person with the beard, I would say, just based on what you've told us, that's somebody who's not really serious about transitioning. That's somebody who is deciding at their own will to, do you know what, I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to identify as a woman. Probably a perfectly reasonable person, but, mixing it up a bit, messing around a bit. I can't think of any other reason why you would want to become a female and all that goes with that, or try and become a female, or transition, whatever the right phrase is, and retain a kind of big old beard. That seems at odds with the journey, you might think. We threw out a question earlier, and it wasn't trite or crass. There was a very good reason behind it. We had a call from Jo in Cornwall on Monday. Can we just hear that, Sam? She called us. We were talking another issue around kind of trans rights and shared toilets and spaces and what makes a woman, etc. And should changing rooms be all of everything you've heard 1,000 times, it seems, almost on a daily basis. Here's what she said.
It's not so much what defines a woman or what defines a man. Really, the only question for me is what defines a transgender person? That's what we need to be talking about. That's the question.
And actually, we heard that and thought, do you know what? That is a really good question. It's a really good question because it might just clear up some of the nonsense surrounding this, which means that people are getting upset and people are getting hurt. No, I don't think anybody, the most evangelical person that thinks, a woman is a woman, it's, an adult female, all of that goes, I get all of that. I get that you can't biologically change to what, but I don't think anyone wants to see anyone hurt or piling in. Social media is a cesspit for this. I mean, the minute you have a trans person on who identifies as a woman, I can set my clock by it. Somebody checks in, get this bloke off. That's the first thing they'll say, like they've never heard that before. You take my point. Surely we don't want to have the debate like that, no matter what you think. So the question just threw up a really obvious and I think, quite an intelligent debate about, well, if we can define what transgender is, and all the other stuff, Disney losing their shizzle and getting rid of ladies and gentlemen like crying fools, like children in the play. Oh, we better not hurt anybody's feelings. Nobody's asked for this, by the way. There's nobody got written to Disney. There's no massive United Nations campaign saying until the Disney Corporation change their wicked way. But for some reason, in a meeting somewhere, one assumes the highest level, they have decreed that the words ladies and gentlemen can no longer exist. That's not even there to placate trans people. We spoke with Miranda Yardley, who's a trans activist, a little earlier. And we were talking about that difference, between men and women and the like. And trans men, trans women. Here's what she said.
What is the difference between a trans woman who doesn't have surgery and doesn't take hormones and a man? What is that material, measurable difference between a man who claims to be a woman and does not go through any form of trans process? There is no difference.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to argue with that, isn't it? So again, we are distinguishing between trans people and people who decide to just call themselves a different gender, etc. Stephen is over here in London. Stephen, hi.
Hi, Ian. Yeah, all the focus seems to be on the bodily differences, the physical differences between men and women, but there's also psychological differences between men and women. I'm an evolutionary psychologist, and evolutionary psychology says just as the bodies of men and women will have evolved to be different because men and women have different purposes in evolution, the most obvious one is women have wombs because women have to bear children.
Yep.
But there will also be different psychological differences because men and women have different roles, behavioural roles in evolution. If I can just give one example, the bottom line in evolution is how many genes you pass on, behaviours which help you pass on more genes. Those behaviours are going to spread in the population because they're going to be more successful. So it's how many genes you pass on or how many babies you have which matters. Now, if a man has sex with 100 women in a year, he could possibly have 100 children. So men should have evolved, men are expected to have a brain that makes them want to have sex with as many women as possible.
To procreate. That's our lizard brain kicking in, as it were.
Well, yeah, okay. So we expect men then to be ready to have short-term sexual relationships, all the time. And we see the evidence of that is it's men overwhelmingly watch porn, and it's men that go to prostitutes because men have evolved this brain which they just want to have sex with as many women as possible. Because men who did that, they'd have had more success in the evolutionary game.
Yeah. No, I get that. That's the point I was echoing on your behalf, as it were. So where do you think this leaves a trans person? Could the trans person, yes, you're right, that if you were born male, then you still have all of those neurological experiences and dimensions to your being. But could a trans person say, yeah, I can't change my biology, but actually what's making me trans is that I don't have all of that psychological stuff?
Well, that's an empirical question. If a woman has sex with 100 men in a year, she's still only going to have one child. So women don't have that desire to have multiple partners like men do. And so the question is, we're talking about all the time, the focus seems to be on bodies, but also we need to examine, do trans women have a desire for multiple partners like men do?
Well, I think that's a really good question, and perhaps only a trans woman or an expert in transitioning would have a more fuller answer to that. My thinking, Stephen, is that probably nobody really knows. I think that's probably
there's a lot of evidence that they do. I mean, my last 3 relationships have been with trans women. My current girlfriend is a trans woman, and so.
You're quite late in the conversation to drop that one in, Stephen, because that makes it more that makes this conversation more interesting and more qualified in many respects. So you date trans women specifically?
Yeah, and I'm open about it, and they.
What's your attraction to trans women? There's got to be a reason for that, I would assume.
Well, I don't want to get too detailed about that, but I'm attracted. I'm attracted to non-trans women as well. I'm attracted to non-trans women as well.
Can I? Is it okay? Is it that? And I don't mean this to be crude, but you just say yes or no. But is it because you feel that it's a woman's body but a man's brain, and the man's brain and the kind of sexualized side of it is the attraction?
No, it's a physical thing.
Okay.
But it's a. I mean, as I say, I'm attracted to cis women and trans women. So
trans women who have transitioned.
Not genitalia wise, no.
Oh, I see. Okay, so right, I hear you now. So, but you're fine that they've transitioned up top, but not down the bottom.
I don't know what you mean up top.
Breasts.
No, they don't. Mine. I don't. I'm not attracted to artificial or artificial breasts.
So you're bisexual then?
No, I'm not. Well, I mean, I'm not attracted to men at all.
But you're dating a man.
Well, I mean, if you met my girlfriend, you would never know that she was a trans woman.
No, I get that, and I respect that. I'm not trying to decry any of that, Stephen. I'm just interested because we are having this debate. But when your girlfriend, to be blunt, is naked, it's a man standing there, right?
Well, not to my brain, because I'm attracted to my girlfriend because she has no hair on her body. Facially she looks female.
Okay.
But I'm not attracted to men. So if I don't,
So it's a kind of hybrid, if you like, of.
Well, it's the female form. I'm attracted to the female form. The genitalia is beside the point, really, because I'm attracted to cis women.
Right,
well,
but there must be something
female.
in the genitalia that is attracting you, is there not? Or the physical, which would include the genitalia, that is attracting you.
But I'm attracted to, and I've got mates as well. My mates are the same as me. They're attracted to women and trans women. They're not attracted to men at all. I'm not attracted to men at all. And if my trans friends introduce me to another trans person, they'll say, "This is Stephen. He's straight." He's not gay.
But are you not, with the best will in the world, are you not having a sexual experience with somebody who is anatomically male, and that can't really be removed from the equation, can it? If you're, having a moment, to coin a phrase.
Well, I'm attracted to the female form.
But it's anything but the female form if you have a penis.
Well, I'm not attracted to men, though.
That's interesting. I'm not making any judgment. I'm genuinely interested.
Yeah, I'm not physically attracted to men at all. If I ever do, which is very rare, if I go to a gay club, I'm not attracted to anyone there.
But you sleep with somebody who has a penis.
Yeah, but they look like a woman. So if I introduced my girlfriend to you or anyone, it's unless they had some special insight, they would never know that this is a trans woman.
I get that, but I was more intrigued in your attraction to somebody when it comes to something physical, bearing in mind you're not gay, you're not bi, you're not attracted to men, and yet the experience you will be having ultimately will be with somebody who might look facially female, but in their bodily sense they will be male.
Well, not bodily. I mean, bodily, they won't have. They don't have any hairs. That they were shaved or take.
Well, that may be true, but they have testicles.
Yeah.
Listen, Stephen, it's fascinating. We threw this out at the beginning because it was fascinating. Thank you for that, Stephen, down in London. Make of that what you will. Elaine is in Derbyshire. Elaine, follow that.
Hello.
Afternoon.
Hello. I think the problem with this conversation, you were speaking to someone a few calls back, is that you're having it in the parameters of, well, if they've transitioned, if they've, had surgery. But most of these men haven't had surgery, such as this MP who is saying that they're trans and then not going to do anything, or Karen White who sexually assaulted women who had no surgery. And that's the issue. I think if we were talking about the majority of these men who had surgery, the conversation would be completely different.
So you're saying it's the other way round, actually. It's your reading is that majority haven't.
Yeah, and also in schools. So we know no under 18s have had any surgery. So the idea that my 16-year-old son can just decide when we go back after Easter, he's now a girl and can enter all the spaces. Yeah. And can I just say, you're talking about this in terms of just changing rooms. Can I just say it affects everything? So, for instance, if you're a foster carer, right, and you say that you can only take on, you can only take girls, for example, right, and social services send you 3 boys that identify as girls. If you are a carer, right, and you have been you are looking after someone who's disabled, who's got Down syndrome, for example, and they need personal care, and the parents say we need a female, and you turn up, Ian, with your shadow and whatever, and you identify as a female. So
and social services will feel compelled to make no distinction, I guess.
Yeah, and it's like this NHS place where the woman got raped. The police asked if there was a rape taking place, and they said, no, there are no men on this ward, and there was. And there was footage of it. There was a man on the ward. Yeah. And this is what I'm saying. So this idea that it's just like changing women, and women are just being pearl clutching. And can I just make one other quick point?
10 seconds, if you would, Elaine, only because the news is coming up.
Women are always suspicious of men who want to enter women's spaces who we don't want in there. It's creepy and it's weird. If we said that we don't want you in the women's toilets, even if you're identified as a man and you're drunk and you're trying to force yourself into the women's toilets, what kind of a man are you?
No, I agree. But, of course, I would have to say, to balance that point, that, most attacks are from allegedly straight men, and those attacks can take place in swimming pools, changing rooms, toilets, and all sorts of places. But I hear your point. I think the point about social services was incredibly interesting. Elaine, thank you for that.